Greetings and salutations, and thanks for clicking on the video. This video is by request. I have been asked to create a video showing how to install a virtual machine in VMware. And the first thing that you will need to do is go to the VMware site and download VMware Player 6 and install it on your computer. And this is what it looks like when you first pull it up. Now, I already have some machines installed here, and we're going to create a new machine and we will start the ball rolling. The first screen that you see is this one, and it gives you some options. You can install from a disk. You can do a quick install, which means that if the VMware player recognizes the system that you have, it's a different protocol, and it will automatically install all the VMware tools and set up your user account before it goes in. This generally with Linux only works with Ubuntu, and I do believe it works with all of the versions of Windows from like Windows 2000 on up. But what we're going to do, and what I always do, is we install the OS later. I want to create the machine first and then set it up, and then install the operating system. So that's already selected, so we will choose next. And in this case, we are going to be installing, and we're going to do Ubuntu. So Linux is definitely what we want to choose. And then go from the list here, and there's Ubuntu. And we're doing 64-bit. And I'm going to move this microphone a little bit, guys. Make sure that you can hear me okay when I lean in to look closer at the screen. All right, so we've chosen our operating system. And if any of these Linux systems are available, you can pretty much install any of these Linux systems with no trouble. And if you have something that's different, like let's say you're trying to do Arch Linux or Manjaro, which is not listed here, then you would choose other 3, .x kernel, because that's where we're at, and this is for older Linux systems. So we're going to do Ubuntu, so let's keep going. And then it's going to give you a chance to name your virtual machine, and it's going to tell you where to put it. Put your name in first. In this case, we'll just call it, well, I'm going to leave it B because I already have Ubuntu installed. So the 64-bit will let me know that this is the one I've done for this video. But you can change that name to anything you want. Bob's Linux or whatever. It really does not matter. It does not affect the operation of anything. And then you can also choose the location. In this case, it's going to default to putting it in a folder called Virtual Machines in my Documents folder on the Windows 7 machine. Now, for these machines you see over here, I have them actually living on a separate drive, which is an SSD, and that makes for a much faster operation. If you actually intend to use these machines, I highly suggest putting another hard drive in your computer. Do not put a Windows page file on it, though. Don't let the system do that, because that will slow down the performance. And having the VMs on their own separate drive will make a big difference. But if you don't have that, don't worry about it. They still run just fine out of your Documents folder in the Virtual Machines folder. So we're going to click Next. And the next thing it's going to ask us is about our hard drive size. Now, what I generally do for Linux distributions is go ahead and give them 40 gigabytes. And the reason why I do that is not because I think the system is actually going to take up 40 gigabytes. It is because the more hard drive space you have, the ext4 file system does a better job of not fragmenting. I also do not make a separate home partition. We'll get into that a little bit later on, but I just like to give it a little bit more space than the 20 gigs that it recommends. I just double that and give it 40. You can give whatever you want. As long as it's over, I'd say 10 gigabytes, it'll work. Okay, and then it's going to give you this choice here whether to split the actual file that the virtual hard disk is saved into other files, or to leave it in one big file. And my recommendation here is to split it. Go ahead and let it do it. That's the default option, because you've got less of a chance of that big file being corrupted, and they're a lot easier to move around from drive to drive if it doesn't have to move one giant file, or if you're trying to do that over a network. That can cause some issues, and it really does not affect the performance, especially if you're putting your virtual machines on an SSD. So there you go. And I'll just go ahead and split them up. And we're going to take a look at the files once we create them anyway, so you guys can see what they look like and what you're dealing with. So go ahead and click Next. And then this is where we can tweak the hardware a little bit. Now, for Ubuntu Linux, it's going to give you a gig of RAM. That's not quite enough. I give it 3. So that'd be 3096, right? Yeah, I guess that would be close enough. Or actually, it's 3104. Because if you give it anything less than that, what it'll do is it'll say that you have 2.9 gigs instead of 3, and I like to keep it even. As far as your processors are concerned, this is a 3-core processor, so I'm going to go ahead and give it 2. And if you have more cores and you have a more up-to-date machine, you can give it more. It'll actually run fine on 1, but we want to make it run fast. In this here, with the CD DVD ROM, we're going to go ahead and leave this on auto detect, but you can tell it specifically what drive it is. It really doesn't matter if you only have one DVD drive in your machine. This is where we will be installing from, so it is important that this is pointed in the right direction. Now, if you download a Linux ISO file off the web and you didn't burn it to DVD, mine just happens to be on a DVD, then what you would do at that point, at this point, is to go find that file and go browse for it, and it will allow you to look in your downloads folder to go get the file. We don't have one, so we're not going to be doing it that way. We're going to leave it on disk. And all of these other ones you can pretty much leave alone. I always make sure that I use accelerated graphics. Some distributions that are on the list, it comes up and it doesn't accelerate the graphics, but we're going to go ahead and leave that checked and make sure that's there. NAT is fine, especially if you're using wireless to connect your machine. And you can also do a bridged connection, but I would only do that if I was using Ethernet. Doesn't seem to work very well with wireless, and basically NAT means that it's just going to it's just how the network is configured and how the virtual machine will get out to the world. So you can look more into that if you want to know what the difference is, but NAT works fine, and these other things will just leave where they are. They'll be just fine. I did want to go back up here and mention with processor, though, you'll see all of these options down here. Just leave it on automatic and don't worry about it. Unless you specifically know what this does. And to tell you the truth, I'm not really sure what it does, so I just leave it unchecked and everything runs fine anyway, so I just let it go. I know a lot about software. I don't know a whole lot about hardware, so that's my deal. If you know better, you go ahead and click on it. I just leave it alone. All right, so once we have it the way we want it, we close and go ahead and finish. And we have created a virtual machine. There it is, Ubuntu 64, and it's ready to go. There is no operating system here yet, but we're going to take care of that right now. Just close that drawer there to put the DVD in, and we're going to go ahead and boot this by playing the virtual machine. Just let me make sure that disk gets good and addressed. Yep, Windows knows it's there. So if Windows knows it's there, that means VMware knows it's there, and we're going to go ahead and boot from this disk. And it will take it a little while. This is just like booting your computer off of a CD. Alright, it took a little while for that to get booted up, but here we are. And we are going to choose at this point to install Ubuntu. However, if you've never played with it before, you can try it. The only thing to keep in mind is that you're going to be at 800 by 600 resolution, and you cannot easily adjust the screen resolution. You can do it from inside the operating system, but I'll just leave it where it is, and we're going to just install for this video. Like I said, you could try it here, but the first thing that you probably want to do once you get the live environment booted up is to adjust the screen resolution, make it a little bit bigger. Alright, when you get to this screen, you are going to have to make a couple of choices. You can download updates while installing. I never bothered to do this because the first thing that the operating system prompts you for as soon as it boots up is to install all the updates. And so this only updates core system files. This does not update the whole system. And I just boot it up from the live. I just go ahead and install the live image and then turn it loose and let it completely update. I think that's a little bit of a cleaner process. And then of course, if you want to play back MP3s and other proprietary things that you want to do with your computer, you have to click here. I'm not going to click either of these just to make this install process go faster. And yes, you do need to be connected to the internet to install Ubuntu because it wants to go out and get some packages as it's installing. So let's move forward, and we're going to talk about the next screen when it gets here. And this is where we have to make some decisions. We're doing a VM. So what I'm going to allow the system to do is to go ahead and erase the entire disk. There's nothing on it anyway, and install it. However, you can come down here to something else, and then what you're going to get is an opportunity to create your own partitions. If you don't know how to do that, don't worry about it. But the advantage to doing that is if you create a system partition and then you create a partition just for the files in your home folder and they are separate, what you can do is you can take a utility like Clonezilla and you can actually create an image file of your Linux distribution, and then you can stick it on hardware. You can, in other words, what you're going to do is you're going to copy the virtual disk, you're going to turn it into a file, you're going to take that file, use Clonezilla to put that same distribution, whatever you do in the virtual machine, on a hardware machine with a blank hard drive in it, and then you can resize your home partition, and it's a way to move it from here to there. If you're not going to do that, then just the erase and install feature is just fine, and that's something that we're going to go ahead and do, and so we can get this going. And that is something that you can look up for yourself. A lot of people do Linux install videos, and you can make your own decision whether that's something that's worth your while doing. I always do it if I'm installing on hardware. I separate the home and root partition just in case I want to reinstall the system or whatever, especially if it's a computer that I'm actually going to use. Time zone. Time zone here is pretty obvious. You just click on whatever part of the world you're in and find a city that's in the same time zone as you are and say OK. So we will continue. Next thing, it's going to ask you about your language. I'm English US. It has come up English US, and so is the keyboard. And we can just leave this alone and just keep on going. And then here's where we set up our account. And what you want to do is give it your full name, and I'm going to do just that. All right, and then it's going to auto fill in some things here. If this is the only virtual machine you have, then whatever it chooses is fine. It's always going to choose Joe Virtual Machine. So what I usually do is I just put the name of the operating system and then VM. Now I already have one on the network, as you can see, that's already there. So we're going to just give this another end here test, and that way it's something different. Okay. Not BM. Jesus, like bowel movement. I want VM. Duh. All right, and then it's going to suggest a username, and I'm going to leave mine the way it is. You can put whatever you want in there. Just don't forget what it is. Short and sweet is best. No spaces. and no caps for a Linux username. And then you put in a password. And I'm going to put a password in here. You can choose one. It's going to rate your password. I mean, how secure you want to make this virtual machine is entirely up to you. So you could put 123 in there if you wanted to. I don't know whether it would allow you to do that or not, but it accepted my password. And here's another decision that you have to make. Log in automatically. I don't suggest that. And the reason why is because if you log in automatically, as soon as the computer boots up, the very first thing it's going to ask you to do when you log into your account is to authorize the keyring, which is just as good as logging in anyway. And so go ahead and have it ask for the password. Now, as far as encrypting your home folder is concerned, should you do that or not? Here's the deal. If you encrypt your home folder and for some reason you have to reinstall, and we're now going to assume that you do have your home folder in a separate partition and you can go through the process of reinstalling the operating system without blowing out all your user files, you're going to be in trouble because then the encryption's not going to work. You're not going to be able to use your files. In other words, you're going to have to back up first, and then you're going to have to reinstall from scratch, re-encrypt to do that. So I don't bother to do that, but that's just something you have to keep in mind. Of course, encrypting your home folder means that somebody cannot get a hold of your computer and put a live disk in it like we're doing now to install and look at your files. If they're encrypted, there's no way. It doesn't have the key and they can't see it. So it's entirely up to you. And of course, on a virtual machine, if this was a virtual machine that you were going to really store some data on, you could encrypt the home folder and not worry about it because we're not separating the partitions anyway. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've created all of that. We're going to continue. And now Ubuntu is going to install itself. And this usually takes, this can take as short as 10 minutes, or depending on how quick your internet connection is, how fast your computer is, or it can take 30 to 45 minutes. And it's just going to go through its process here. So we're going to pause the video here, and when we come back, we will be at the first boot. What this is going to do is it's going to install, and then it's going to tell you to restart your computer, and we will pick it up from there because this does take just a little bit of time. Okay, Ubuntu has finished installing. It took it about 25 or 30 minutes. It took it a little bit longer for the video that I had recorded to render, so that's why the clock that you notice up in the upper right hand corner is a little bit further down the road than the 25 or 30 minutes it took to install. But when it got done, this is where it dumped us out, and we have this screen here. Now, yes, you could go ahead and just click restart now, but I'm going to do something a little bit different because I want to show you something that you're going to need to check on before you boot the machine the first time, because if it's not where it needs to be, it will mess up the next step in the process. So instead of worrying about that down there, I'm going to go up here and choose Shutdown, and we're going to shut down the virtual machine. And this usually takes a couple of seconds. And this is taking a few moments to shut itself down. This is not unusual. And it is not unusual for this process to lock up. In other words, you're trying to shut down the live environment that you installed from, and it just freezes up. I don't think it's doing it in this case because I hear the DVD drive going, but sometimes it does. So what you have to do is just brute force power off the machine and then restart. It will not affect the installation that we just created at all to do that. Here we go. The disk has ejected itself, and we're going to press enter. And then it will shut itself down. What you don't know is that I actually edited out the part where the machine for some reason decided it was going to restart. Which is what it did. I think I selected the wrong thing, but anyway, if you select shutdown, it should shut down. Now what I want you to look at here is go into your machine that you just created, go to the settings, and make sure that the DVD drive is set to auto detect. If you had used an image file, like we discussed earlier, it would still be connected. And if it was, then the next step in our process would not work properly, and you would probably be scratching your head trying to figure out why. Because we need to get our VMware tools installed so that we can get the full benefit of the VM. So we're going to boot it up for the first time. This is the first time that it's actually booted up off of the hard drive, the virtual hard drive that we just created. So this is the first boot of our install. And didn't install this on the SSD. This is on the spinning drive. If you put this on an SSD to store your virtual machine, the boot time is really short, but it takes a little bit longer when you're doing it from a regular spinning drive, especially if your host operating system is working off of it, and in this case it is. So here we go. And we should get a login screen for our first boot, and we do have that. So just click in here and type in your password, and you will be booted up into Ubuntu for the first time. And we're going to go ahead and get those VMware tools installed immediately as soon as this gets booted up. And you want to do this first. This is the very first thing that you want to do before you do anything else in this system. You want to make sure that these tools are installed. And so let's go ahead and do that. You come up here and you go to Manage, Install VMware Tools. And what the system is going to do is it's going to mount the VMware tools on a ISO image to the CD of the CD DVD of the guest operating system, and then you'll be able to go click on it. So here it automatically comes up, and then what you're going to see is a bunch of stuff in here, and then we have this tar gzip file, tar.gz. This is where they actually are. So what we need to do is extract this. So in Ubuntu and most other Linux distributions, just right click and extract to, and it's going to check it out in there. And I want to put it in my home folder that I have just created, and tell it to extract, and it's going to do it. And we're there. And it shut itself down, and then you can go ahead and close this. Don't worry about that. I have seen this every other time that I have installed, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the operation of the system later. Okay, so we'll need a terminal, and in Ubuntu it's Control, Alternate, and T together. And that should bring us up a terminal. And there we go. And we're already in our home folder, so if we run the list storage command, you'll see the VMware tools distrib there. So we need to switch to that directory, CD, okay. And we're going to go ahead and list this as well, list storage. And you'll see that there is a file in here called VMware-install.pl. And that is a script that we need to run to install VMware tools on our new Ubuntu virtual machine. And the command for that will be sudo /VMware install.pl. It's going to ask for my password. And here we go. It's going to ask you a bunch of questions, and you just basically click yes to everything here. And in Ubuntu, this is absolutely no problem. In Linux Mint, this is no problem. In any derivative of Ubuntu, this is not a problem. However, in Fedora, Debian, and other types of Linux, you may run into a situation where you have to have some packages installed before you can do this. So just do a web search on install VMware tools in your distribution. Now, if you install OpenSUSE, you don't have to worry about that because all of this stuff is already installed. And see, those are the two packages that you have to have. It's warning us now, and it's telling us we have to have make, we have to have GCC, and we have to have the kernel headers of the current kernel we have. This is already all here because we're running Ubuntu, and all of those packages come pre-installed. So you just follow these questions and let it take care of itself. And it's building its modules, and we want to be able to drag and drop files, and we want to use thin print, which allows us to use the host's printer without actually having to set anything up, which is really cool. And it is now generating the modules for the kernel that we have, and it's 3.13 at this point. Actually, we are on, or rather, 3.13. This is an old kernel, is what I'm kind of saying. We're on dash 3.5. That's all. Okay, so VMware tools are installed on the machine, but they're not going to do anything yet. We either have to reboot the system, or just to make sure everything's working, we can type in VMware -user. And to make sure that that actually worked, we'll go to full screen, and it resizes the screen. And we are done, ladies and gentlemen. We have a full distribution of Ubuntu running, and we can go in here and change it and do whatever we want to it. And it is just like having this on a piece of hardware, but it is not hardware. So, we can do everything that we would do with Ubuntu if it was on a regular system. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to do is you'll notice that it is saying that it wants updates. And before you do anything else to this system, before you change any settings, before you do anything else, go ahead and let it install its updates. And the way you do that is just to click install, and it's going to go out and check, and it's going to ask for your password once again to change the kernel, and you're going to get all of the latest updates of all your software, and it is going to make a big difference in your experience with the operating system. So let us go ahead and talk for a moment about VMware. Some of you may be wondering why I'm not using VirtualBox. I have found that VirtualBox, at least on my Windows 7 host, was very shaky, and I didn't get all of the features to work. With VMware, you get disk burning, you get the printing, you get to hook up all kinds of devices to the machine, USB devices. Just seems to be a much better system, and also it's way more stable. It's very robust, and it integrates well with the host system. And so if you're actually going to be using a virtual machine, it's something that you want to actually do something with, I would suggest going and getting VMware Player and downloading it. It's a free download, and you can download it you can install it on Linux. It's actually not hard to do. but I'm assuming that most of you are probably running some form of Windows. It works fine on Windows 7, works great on Windows 8. Don't know about Vista, don't know about XP. Well, it should work fine on XP, except XP is not supported anymore, so you shouldn't be running XP. You should be running something else. Before we close the video, I wanted to show you exactly where these machines are stored on the system and what the files look like, just so you have some sort of idea. Now, on my system, I have a drive called VM. This is a small SSD, and here are my virtual machines. And if you open these folders, you see you have a whole bunch of files, and this represents your virtual machine. These VMDK files right here, this is your hard drive. And so you don't want to mess with those because if you blow out one of those files by accident, you've lost the entire virtual machine. Now, what if your install didn't go well, or you install a VM that you don't like? Well, they are so easy to get rid of. All you do is click on it, which I just did. And I ought to show you this very quickly. You don't have to shut down and restart the machine every time, because you can actually suspend the virtual machine, and VMware will shut everything down and store its state. And I'll show you what that looks like real quick, because it's actually quite useful. It's a useful feature, especially if you're working on a bunch of stuff. Let's say that you have more than one virtual machine open, and you're going to walk away from the computer real quick, and you don't want to wait for the shutdown procedure and all that stuff. And it will save a steady state of your virtual machine. So let's go in here and boot back in, and let's say that I'm running my Ubuntu, and I go, oh my, I have got to be doing something else. Then all you do is bring this up and pause it. And it'll say, are you sure? Yes, we're going to pause that machine. It's now paused. It's done. So, when I bring up VMware again, and I click on my machine, now I get a screenshot of where I left the machine. And then when I play it, it just wakes it back up. And there's no login, there's no boot up, there's nothing. One of the things I really like about VMware. Okay, anyway, I was going to show you how to get rid of a virtual machine when you were done with it. And it's really quite simple. Let's go ahead and shut this down. And we'll go back to our original screen here. Pick the machine that we want to remove. Right click on it. And we want to delete from disk. And when we do that, it's going to say, are you sure? Really? Yeah, I'm really sure. Let's get rid of it. Virtual machine gone. So you can download distributions of Linux, or play with old Windows installs, or whatever you want to do. And when you're done with them, they go poof. And it's really gone from the hard drive. Thanks for watching the vid, guys. I hope you found it somewhat instructional. This is really just the tip of the iceberg with this. There's a lot of great information online. You certainly won't cost you a thing to go ahead and download a VMware player and give it a whirl. See what you can do with it. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.